La crisis que vivimos hoy es también un momento muy oportuno para impulsar la acción por una recuperación verde. Ignorar el clima y la degradación ambiental mientras se trabaja para salvar la economía sería cortoplacista y perjudicial para las próximas generaciones. Y espero que muchas de las personas que escuchan son jóvenes. Esta pandemia de COVID-19 es ante todo una tragedia humana. Los gobiernos de todo el mundo tienen la responsabilidad de abordar sus impactos sanitarios, económicos y sociales y también de proteger a sus ciudadanos de las conmociones externas e internas y prepararse para futuras amenazas. La recuperación de COVID es la oportunidad para que los gobiernos demuestren que son realmente capaces de abordar esos desafíos mediante una construcción de sociedades inclusivas y resilientes para la salud y el bienestar de sus ciudadanos. Bueno, yo estoy planeando es mandar un resumen de nuestro webinar al Ayuntamiento de Ámsterdam y ver si hay un camino para colaborar con Costa Rica y quizás con la ciudad de San José. Y espero que después del webinar ya no hablemos de crecimiento de la economía, pero que seamos protagonistas de la humanidad. Muchas gracias.
The next panelist is Viceminister of Economy, Industry and Commerce, Carlos Mora Gomez. He has a master in economy from the Catholic University of Chile and worked as economic and financial analyst and investigator at the Central Bank of Costa Rica and as economic consultant for different countries in Mesoamerica and the Inter-American Development Bank. I give the floor to you, Mr. Vice Minister.
Thank you very much. Muy buen día a todos. Señora Marije de Jeude, presidenta de la Junta Directiva de Holland House Costa Rica, profesora Kate Raworth, profesora de la Universidad de Oxford y creadora del modelo de la economía de la Dona, y señor Eduard Müller, rector y presidente de la Universidad para la Cooperación Internacional. Es un placer para mí estar en esta mañana con ustedes, principalmente conversando con un modelo tan innovador y que nos plantea tantos retos. Porque la economía tradicional ha basado su éxito o el éxito de las naciones en un solo indicador, el crecimiento del Producto Interno Bruto, a tal punto que muchos economistas lo han convertido casi en un objetivo en sí mismo y se han olvidado del verdadero eje central de la economía, la satisfacción de las necesidades de las personas. En las últimas décadas se ha logrado mayor conciencia de que el crecimiento de las economías no solamente se puede medir por el PIB, sino que tiene que venir acompañado de una serie de indicadores de bienestar en un planeta en que todos los recursos se volvieron finitos y el crecimiento económico no ha sido ni inclusivo ni sostenible. Precisamente la economía de la Dona persigue ese objetivo, de satisfacer las necesidades de todos, haciendo un uso eficiente de los recursos finitos y garantizando la sostenibilidad medioambiental. Además, el modelo es meticuloso al repasar los 7 aspectos en los que la economía convencional no ha resuelto. Costa Rica se ha identificado y se ha posicionado en el mundo como un país verde, no solamente por el color de sus bosques y de su exuberante ecología, sino también porque es un país que ama el medio ambiente, lo protege y lo respeta. Para el Ministerio de Economía, Industria y Comercio, como rector en el diseño de políticas de Estado en materia de fomento a la iniciativa privada, desarrollo empresarial y fomento de esa cultura empresarial, es de suma importancia apoyar la creación de nuevos modelos de negocio que incorporen la tecnología, la innovación, pero también haciendo un uso sostenible de los recursos y garantizando la satisfacción de las necesidades de toda la población. Quiero agradecerles, es un honor estar precisamente en la presentación de este modelo acá, con todos los panelistas y con todos los espectadores, y quiero terminar citando una frase de la profesora Raworth. Este modelo podría ser la brújula que necesitamos para crear un siglo XXI más justo y seguro. Muchas gracias por la invitación y espero que sea de mucho provecho este conversatorio. Buen día.
Equal. Thank you very much. Good day.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vice Minister. Also very inspiring words. We will now move on to the first panelista with presentation, which is Kate Raworth, economist, professor of Oxford University and the creator of the innovative model of the Doughnut Economy. And I actually want to ask the other panelist, Eduard Müller, the director of the University for International Cooperation, to present Kate. Eduard, go ahead.
Thank you, Mary, for the opportunity, and thank you so much, Kate, for having accepted. This is actually a blended event. It's part of our regular program for the Certificate in Regenerative Entrepreneurship, where Kate had already offered to give a talk, and knowing that Kate is very busy, I decided to blend our activity when I got the invitation from Holland House. So thank you for joining. I won't say much right now. I think Kate is well known, but I've had the pleasure of knowing Kate already for several years, and the Doughnut has been a basic component of inspiration for the Regenerative Costa Rica initiative, which I'll talk on later. So, with no further ado, please, Kate, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ed. And it's sincerely an honor to join all of you, Ambassador Pirenne and Vice Minister Mora and everybody on this conversation. I'm really looking forward to what we can co-create here today, because we're going to be talking about new ideas. I have to say, I have a very English cat sitting on my lap, and his ears were pricking up because he could hear the sound of Costa Rican birds. And I could tell he was like, what is that? So it's beautiful to hear the sound of the birds in the background where you are. So I'm going to share my screen because what I'm going to talk about is best told in pictures. So yes, we're going to talk about donuts, only the conceptual kind. We shouldn't be eating too many donuts, just the ones in our heads are the good ones for us. And I'm going to talk about possibilities of downscaling the donut for Costa Rica, which is a project I'm loving working on with Eduard and many others in Costa Rica. So let's just start with the 21st century, because it's begun with multiple crises, from many countries experiencing financial meltdown in 2008. We know we live in an era of climate and ecological breakdown, which is undermining the landscapes and the livelihoods and the security of populations in so many countries. And then most recently, every nation is facing COVID lockdown, whether at the street level or the national level. So these crises, I believe, are arising out of the very systems that we've created. We have economies that aim to expand endlessly. And this seems to be what happens when we have an attempt to have endless financial expansion. The system collapses on itself. An endless energy and material expansion, we are disrupting the life supporting systems of our planet. And then we've had endless human expansion and connection into wildlife spaces, but also intense connectivity between countries, which means we make ourselves prone to pandemics like COVID-19. I believe these repeated crises tell us that it's time, as the Vice Minister so eloquently put it, to seek more than the single number of GDP growth as the way of guiding ourselves in the 21st century. And of course, all of these crises that I'm mentioning have sharp inequalities of gender and of race, of wealth and power between the global north and the global south. And we need to bring solutions and new orientations that are mindful of all of those inequalities, because they are very real. So for this, I want to offer a donut, the conceptual kind, and you can take it as a possible compass for human prosperity in the 21st century. So for people who this is new to, let me explain. Imagine humanity's use of Earth's resources radiating out from the middle of that picture. And that means the hole in the middle of the donut is a place where people don't have the essentials of life, where people don't have enough food, decent housing, clean water, good healthcare, good education for their children, connectivity, political voice, gender equality. And these 12 dimensions on the inside, I have drawn them from the Sustainable Development Goals. And the power of that is that every government in the world has already agreed that every person in the world has the right to meet these essentials. So we must leave nobody in the hole of the donut. Get everybody into the green ring. But there's a very big 21st century but, because we now know that the way that humanity is putting pressure on Earth's systems is beginning to push us beyond an ecological ceiling of resilience and thriving health. We are causing climate breakdown. We are acidifying our oceans and creating a hole in the ozone layer, and catastrophic loss of species from insects to fish and coral in the sea. So these 9 dimensions around the outside are the planetary boundaries, which were recognized by leading Earth system scientists just 1 decade ago. This is such new science. This is such a new understanding that humanity is only just beginning to grasp. So when I put these together, the social foundation and the ecological ceiling, we can say that the goal of the donut is to meet the needs of all people within the means of the living planet. It sounds so simple, but it's actually a new orientation for humanity, because as the Vice Minister said, the governments we've had for the last 80 years at least have not been aiming for that. They've been aiming for GDP growth, which sometimes might go along with it, but a lot of the time it's not automatically going to go along with it at all. So we need to refine and sharpen up our policy making. This picture shows us the goal of where we want to get to, but we're very far from that. This picture shows us the extent to which we are currently in shortfall and overshoot at the same time. So all of the red inside the circle shows you the number of people worldwide who don't have the essentials of life. On food, you can see there's a little red wedge. It goes 11% of the way to the middle of the circle, because 11% of people don't have enough food to eat every day. But there is shortfall on every one of those dimensions. Most of those people are living in the global south. And as we know, I can walk out of my house here in Oxford, I can walk into the streets of Oxford, I will meet people who don't have a place to sleep, who don't have decent healthcare or food or political voice. So there's also extreme deprivation in the midst of the wealth of the global north. Billions of people cannot still meet their most essential needs. And yet we have already overshot at least 4 of these planetary boundaries. On climate change, the ecological ceiling is set at 350 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Today, the world is over 415. We are massively overusing fertilizers, nitrogen and phosphorus, that is not taken up by plants, but goes into the water and kills off aquatic life. We've seen massive biodiversity loss in terms of species loss, but also the breakdown of the integrity of ecosystems, and land conversion of humans. Conversion of Earth's surface is too great. We need to pull back and make more room for nature. So I call this humanity's selfie.
Yo llamo eso el selfie de la humanidad. Esta es nuestra imagen colectiva y en estos días del siglo XXI. Y ya hemos visto esta imagen. Ya no podemos dejar de no verlo, no podemos olvidarlo, y nuestros nietos podrán ver esto. Y de ahora, ese era el indicador que tuvimos en el 2020. Y yo sinceramente creo que mirarán hacia atrás y nos van a juzgar a todos nuestros nietos por lo que hicimos cuando ya nos dimos cuenta, porque ninguna generación antes de nosotros vio esto. Así es que, ¿por qué esperaríamos que los modelos del siglo pasado y las teorías económicas
Why would we expect any of those to solve this problem? None of them were designed for this problem because they never saw it. This is our challenge. This is our understanding. And we need to recreate economic theories and policies and businesses and community actions and international agreements that start with this reality and that tackle this challenge and start to turn it round, so that when we face our grandchildren, we can be proud to say, yes, we saw it and we were the generation that began to turn the story around. So I'm showing you the donut at the global scale, and this is a very challenging picture. If we seriously allow ourselves to see and feel what that holds, it holds all of the news headlines that no doubt we all see every day, of floods and glacial melt and droughts and fires and disruption and poverty and inequality. So let's orient ourselves towards actually acting on it, and in the places where we are, turning them around, because this picture at the global scale may encompass the whole of humanity. But of course, most action happens at governance at a national level or a city level or a regional level. So what if we downscale the donut to the level where policymaking actually happens and where people feel they have the power to make a difference? Well, here's the University of Leeds, some brilliant researchers there, downscaled the donut for 150 countries. And I'm showing you just 3 here. On the one end, you have Rwanda, which you can see from the red inside is falling far short on meeting their people's most essential needs, but they're not overshooting any of those planetary boundaries. They're both putting very little pressure on the earth as a nation. At the other side, you have Australia, which is meeting the needs of all its people. Of course, there is still that deprivation of people within the global north, but they're not picked up because this is quite a low global threshold on social well-being. And in terms of countries that are almost doing it, Australia's up there. But look at the overshoot of those planetary boundaries, massive overshoot. And to be clear, this isn't just use of Earth's resources that's happening on the land we call Australia. It's the use of Earth's resources that's embedded in all the products that Australians import and consume, the food and the electronics goods, the consumer goods, the clothing, the construction materials. So it's their global footprint on the planet. And then a country in the middle, Brazil, falling short quite significantly on a number of people's essential needs and overshooting 7, even almost all of those planetary boundaries, already an overshoot. So having to solve both of these challenges at the same time. Now, I know what many people on this call are thinking, so where's Costa Rica? Well, Costa Rica is the country I often show as the story of possibility, because Costa Rica, like Brazil, is falling short on people's needs and already an overshoot. But as you can see, it's falling short on a few of those social needs, and it's overshooting planetary boundaries only a little bit. Compared to most countries, Costa Rica is closer than most to meeting the needs of all people within the means of the planet. And you haven't even started trying to do that. That hasn't even been yet an explicit policy goal. Just imagine what could happen if you aim for that. To me, Costa Rica is the country of possibility because you show that it's nearly possible to meet the needs of all, nearly almost within the means of the planet. So know that you are an inspiration of possibility to other countries. Let's put these in the context of 150 countries. So the sweet spot is that top left-hand corner where the donut is, where we meet the needs of all people, but we do it without overshooting pressure on the planet. Now, what you can see is that there's no country that is doing it. There's no country that is meeting all people's needs within those means of the planet. So to me, this tells us we are all developing countries now. There is not one single nation on the planet, no matter how rich, that can put up its hand and say we're developed, because they're not. That was a very 20th century conception. When we take a 21st century understanding of what human well-being depends upon, the richest nations in the world have as much of a transformation to make as the poorest nations, a very different one, but it's an equally unprecedented journey. And to me, this tells us that what we need now in every nation is unprecedented humility from the richest especially, but also unparalleled ambition to start driving nations in a new direction. Now, in and amongst these, there's Costa Rica. It looks like Costa Rica is in the middle of the pack, but that's because this measures, are you over a planetary boundary? Are you falling short on social thresholds? And Costa Rica is on multiple ones. But as I said before, you're actually overshooting much less than most countries, and you're falling short much less than most countries. So it's actually, I think, well within the scope of Costa Rica to be one of the fastest movers to that corner. I hope that gives you ambition to do what is indeed possible for your nation. Every country needs to make this journey, and we've never seen it. So let's use 2020 post-COVID as the pivot point where we start making the transformations we already knew that we already needed. This is at the national level. I want to bring it down a level, because together with the C40 cities, together with circular economy and biomimicry, we at Doughnut Economics Action Lab have pioneered what it means to downscale the donut to a city. And that's why I'm so thrilled that this call brings together the Netherlands and Costa Rica, because of course, Amsterdam is the pioneering city that has done and published its city portrait. So I'll just introduce to you the concept. We invited Amsterdam and other cities, Portland and Philadelphia, to ask themselves this question: how can our city be a home to thriving people in a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? And that breaks down to 4 questions. We call them the 4 lenses of the city portrait. The first question: what would it mean for the people of Amsterdam to thrive? So what does thriving mean for those people? We have to ask them. We have to ask the people of Amsterdam, what for you is the good life? For your culture, for your norms, from your history, from how you understand what a good life is. What does thriving mean here? And where are you? How close are you to thriving? Then we need to ask, what would it mean for Amsterdam to thrive within its natural habitat? Because every city, like every nation, is placed in a different, unique spot on Earth's surface. In an Arctic circle or on the equator, at the top of a mountain or deep in a valley, in a floodplain or in a savanna. And so nature thrives and survives differently in each of those places. And how can we make our cities and our nations belong in the ecosystems that they are embedded in? What would it mean for Amsterdam to store groundwater just as the nearby landscape does? What would it mean for Amsterdam as a city to cool the air as the nearby forest would do? What would it mean for Amsterdam to house biodiversity as the forest houses biodiversity? So how can our cities aim to belong in the landscapes of which they are a part, so that humanity truly is part of the living world? So these two, the social and the ecological, they're local aspirations of a place. We want to have good lives for people here with clean air and healthy forests and fresh water in the river. That's great, but we have to recognize that every place is embedded in global relationships and has impacts on people and the planet worldwide. So we have to set that local aspiration in the context of global responsibility. So we also ask, what would it mean for Amsterdam to respect the health of the whole planet? Think of all of the food and electronics and consumer goods and clothing and construction materials that are imported into Amsterdam every day, and all the waste that streams out. Where do all those resources come from? Where does all the waste go? And what impact do they have on the planet? That is a good part of what's making all high income cities and countries overshoot planetary boundaries. It's from the resources they draw from the world. So how can they transform that consumption draw on the world so that they pull back within planetary boundaries? And then lastly, think also of the people involved in picking and packing the fruit, in stitching and sewing the clothes, in packing and shipping the consumer goods, in digging and mining the construction materials. All the peoples whose labor is in those supply chains, all the communities who are affected by those supply chains. How do we ensure that those supply chains respect the fundamental rights of those people? So these are the 4 questions that we asked in Amsterdam's city portrait. And it's not an easy portrait to look at. Amsterdam is a pioneer because it was willing to publish its portrait that shows that Amsterdam has a port importing cocoa from West Africa, from plantations on which we know there is modern day slavery. So it even connects the city of Amsterdam to exploitative labor practices on the other side of the world. But for me, this is really to the integrity of the city of Amsterdam. They said, we will publish this because this is true for cities everywhere. It doesn't go away just because you hide it. Let's make it visible, and then let's ask these questions. How do we transform? So we held workshops in Amsterdam, in Portland, and in Philadelphia with city change makers. And as you can see, they are sitting around their own city portraits, engaging with it with stickers and with pens, really looking at the connections between these four lenses, looking for the opportunities, looking for the tensions, looking for insights that you would never see if you don't take this holistic perspective. Here's Amsterdam city portrait, and let me give you one example that comes out of using this portrait in a holistic way. So the city of Amsterdam say, we know we need more housing. We have people moving here, we don't have enough housing. But if we were just to build housing in the way we've always built housing, we will exacerbate climate change. Rather than coming back within planetary boundaries, we'll go further out. So we can't do it the same old way. We have to create circular housing. We have to have construction that uses resources again and again, that uses materials far more ecologically, far more carefully. Now, how do we design that? How do we design circular housing construction? And let's use the city portrait to think about that. So if we're going to design circular housing construction, how do we ensure that it mitigates climate change by reducing far fewer carbon emissions? But it also, how do we do it in a way that reduces air pollution, that creates far less waste generation by being circular, that uses far less land than we would normally have done? How do we do it in a way that actually sequesters carbon locally? We can make timber buildings so that you're capturing carbon in the very body of the building. How do we harvest energy? We put solar panels on the roofs of the building, so we're capturing solar energy. How do we support biodiversity? By building niches into the wall that allow birds and creatures to live. How do we build these circular houses in a way that builds community in this city, that makes that housing affordable, that makes jobs and good income for people in the construction, that ensures the health of the occupants and ensures diversity in who can afford to live there? And how do we do it in such a way that we ensure the materials that we're buying from across the world respect the rights, the health, the employment, the security, and the communities who are providing those materials? So you can see just from this one question of how do we design circular construction for housing in Amsterdam, it invites us to look at it through these holistic lenses. And we've found from cities who've used this, they say it really opened up our minds to looking at far more innovative ways of designing the policies we were already going to design, or creating a COVID recovery strategy in a far more holistic way than the narrow thinking that we set out on. We also believe that there's a real potential to take the city portrait and turn it into a tool for the city change makers themselves. So layering onto the statistics that we've gathered here, examples of transformation already in practice. It's already happening. It's sometimes just hidden. Let's make it visible. Layering on the connections that people can see between the different lenses, the synergy and the tensions. Layering on people's values and what the community see matters for them locally in terms of the local green spaces, their sense of their relation to the rest of the world. Layering on stories and quotes and histories and lived experience from the very different neighborhoods to show the diversity of realities in Amsterdam. And layering on initiatives, ideas that people have for transformation we could make here that would have all sorts of knock-on effects on our whole city portrait. So we believe the city portrait has a huge potential to come alive in the hands of the community. Amsterdam published its city portrait in April. That was the month that Amsterdam had its most intense COVID infection rate. And the city government said, we're going to do this because we may be in an emergency, but we can't stop the process of government. And as we start to emerge from this emergency, we'll be asking ourselves, which way do we want to go? When we reboot and rebuild our economy, which direction do we want it to point? Do we want more of the same that we already knew was wrong? Or are we going to pivot to where we already needed to go? And so they published the city portrait as a tool for envisioning and shaping their COVID recovery strategy. We, in the team that created the methodology, simultaneously published the methodology so that cities and change makers everywhere could see exactly how we did it, and they could take it and adapt it to their own place. And without any of our involvement, already since April, so many places, from cities and towns and neighborhoods, even to nations, have said, we are doing this. We are adapting this methodology to where we are in our own place. And one of those, of course, is Costa Rica. And I'm really enjoying working with Eduard and others to see how we can bring the donut to Costa Rica. And I want to talk more about that. So we can see the potential for downscaling the donut at multiple levels. And I've got here just 4 examples. From the neighborhood level in Ladywood, which is a very underserved neighborhood in the city of Birmingham in the UK, to the county of Devonshire in the southwest corner of the UK, to the city of Amsterdam, the story I just told, and here to the nation of Costa Rica. These show that this could be transformative at different scales, and that there are pioneers and leaders everywhere who are saying, we see the relevance of this framework in our community, and we want to be the first to adapt it to this context and our reality and our interests. And we know that's going to inspire people and places worldwide. I was in a shop in my neighborhood recently, and I found this wrapping paper. And I thought, that's the wrapping paper we need, because it's the donut at the national level and the city level and the local level, showing that it can be done at many scales. So let me pose for you the possibility that you could do a Costa Rican national donut. What would that mean? And I invite everybody on this call, whether you're in Costa Rica right now or we're all thinking about Costa Rica, let us invite ourselves to ask these questions through the lens of this beautiful country. So how can Costa Rica be a home to thriving people in a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? Well, what would it mean for the people of Costa Rica to thrive? The people in all their diversity, the people in cities and out living in the forests, the people who are involved in agriculture and the people who are involved in industry, the people who are as young as these and the people who are old. What would it mean for all the people to thrive? The culture, the norms, the value, the histories, the aspirations of the country. What does that mean for you? And where is the country now? What would it mean for Costa Rica to thrive within its habitat? How its cities are built, how its agriculture is practiced, how its tourism industry is embedded within the forests. How could all of these different industries and services and urban spaces belong to the beautiful, unique ecosystems that we call Costa Rica and that the world celebrates? What would it mean for Costa Rica to respect the health of the whole planet? Yourselves, like every other nation, are importing food and cosmetics and electronics and clothing and construction materials. This is a photograph from the Amazon, where we know that deforestation is happening for soy plantation, for beef production. How can Costa Rica ensure that it's not part of putting that unsustainable pressure, that degrading pressure on planet Earth? And think of all the people in the supply chains. Costa Rica's imports, whether from the United States or from China or from Guatemala or from other countries, who's involved in those supply chains? What's the labor of the people caught in those chains? How do we ensure that what we're importing and using respects their rights? So these are really big questions. And I hope for everyone in Costa Rica, they give you a possibility of opening up a huge inquiry that belongs as a national conversation, that involves society and ecology, that is both local and your global footprint, because we believe these questions do orient a city and a place and a nation to that 21st vision of thriving regeneratively and distributively. So let's come to the dynamics that we think cities and countries will need to bring about to make this happen. How can we get into the donut? The 20th century, and I'm going back to the Vice Minister's comments here, the 20th century promised us that growth would deliver. This from economics is called the Kuznets curve on inequality and the environmental Kuznets curve on environmental degradation. And the Kuznets curve promised that as you grow Inequality may first increase, but then it will decrease and things will even up again. And the Kuznets curve promises that as you grow, environmental degradation will first increase, but then it will decrease. It turns out this isn't true. Growth does not even things up again. Inequalities have been rising in so many nations, and growth does not clean up after itself. Ecological degradation is only rising, especially when we look at a nation's global ecological footprint. So these dynamics are not going to sort themselves out, and growth will not automatically take us to where we want to go. We need to create new dynamics for the 21st century. The first one is to move away from degenerative linear economies, industries that take Earth's materials, make them into stuff we want, use it for a while, and throw it away. And that take, make, use, lose is what pushes us over planetary boundaries. It's what runs down the living Earth. We need to bend those arrows into loops and circles so that we reuse and refurbish and recycle and regenerate Earth's living systems, allowing nature on one hand to regenerate through regenerative agriculture, regenerative food systems, but also all the technical materials from a computer mouse to a mobile phone, to the clothing we wear, to the houses we live in. These materials too must be reused and recycled and restored far more carefully and collectively than any industrial design has done before. It's a phenomenal opportunity to create circular economies where waste from one process becomes food for the next. And this will massively reduce our footprint on the planet. But we also need to create economies that, instead of centralizing opportunity and value in the hands of a few, as the rise of the global 1% has shown, we need to create economies that are distributive of opportunity and value. That starts, of course, with investing in the health and the education of every child. But it also means creating distributive enterprises that are owned in a way that share the value with employees and through supply chains. It means owning land and ensuring that land is used in ways that are distributive of value, not collecting it in the hands of the elite few. It means creating industries that are distributive with small and medium enterprises in a network rather than dominated by one large corporation. And of course, it means creating an international trading regime and financing regime that rebalances the power of global North and global South. So these dynamics, I believe, need to be at the heart of national strategies. What that would look like in each nation is for that nation to determine. As Ambassador Pirenne said at the beginning, the donut doesn't tell us how to get there. It shows us the goal, it gives us the dynamics, but how in every country is going to be that country's national story. Here for me is the inspiration that we can draw on, that in the 20th century, the major technologies that industry depended upon were centralizing by design. It was fossil fuel production, it was mass factory production, it was communications through a centralized switchboard, and knowledge in patents and copyrights. And these technologies centralized the returns in the hands of a few. And we are an extraordinarily lucky generation. I mean, there's a lot of unlucky things that we are born with and responsible for, but here's our luck. We are alive at a time when technology is asking to be distributive by design. Energy is asking to be generated in distributed networks, so small that you can have them on the roof of your house or in this village in India. Production is asking to be desktop, 3D printing. It's asking to be small scale farming and agroforestry. Communications are asking to be in the hands of every person, a node of the network in every hand, including this lady in Tanzania. Unprecedented reach of human connection. And knowledge is asking to be shared through the commons so that we can co-create designs. I think there's an unprecedented opportunity to bring these technologies together and create 21st century industrial futures and agricultural futures that can be truly regenerative and distributive by design. Let me end here. We need to start 21st century economics recognizing that the economy is embedded in society and embedded in the living world. This has to be the starting common sense for 21st century economics, knowing that how we design our economies must be in collaboration and coherent with the thriving living world. But even just when we go inside the economy, 20th century economics started always with the market, the supply and demand, and then brought in the state. And the trouble with that is when we begin with the market, we imagine ourselves just as rational economic man. Are you a consumer or producer? Are you labor or capital? And it puts us into this role of being competitive and self-interested. That's the story we're told of who we are or should be in the economy. But this is just one sliver of our identity. Bring in the state and we may be public servant. We may be resident, voter, and protester, all of these crucial roles that we play in our relations with the state, in the household, parent, partner, relative, or child, in the commons, a volunteer, a sharer, a co-creator, or a steward. And many people have experienced during lockdown of COVID that when the marketplaces were literally closed, these household, state, and commons roles, the we of society has been renewed, re-remembered, rediscovered. And so many people say the one thing I don't want to let go of from lockdown is that sense of connection. This is definitely true in Western atomized societies. So we need the skills and the recognition that all of these I'm showing on the screen, all of these are our economic identities, and that our economies depend upon the thriving interconnection between the market, the state, and the household and the commons, because they are all sources of our well-being. At Doughnut Economics Action Lab, we are so inspired by change makers who have already just started putting Doughnut Economics into action. And those are the people we love to work with. We've set up a community platform and we invite everybody on this call, if you're inspired, to please join, become a member, and see the tools and the stories that we've already created. And here are some examples of the tools and stories, from a Maori reinterpretation of the donut to here, Regenerate Costa Rica. It's an interview conversation between myself and Eduard about the initiative of Regenerate Costa Rica. I think Costa Rica is one of the countries that sincerely has the greatest opportunity to demonstrate to the world what it means to become a doughnut economy, to become regenerative and distributive by design. And I jokingly like to say that I won't be surprised if you rename yourselves Costa Regenerica, because that would be a very fitting name. So let me end there with this big question that I offer to you as a nation. And I really look forward to hearing Eduard's comments and the conversation afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kate, for this very inspiring presentation. So the question for everybody is, how can our city or our country be a home to thriving people in a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? I think that is a great question that we can all take with us as a learning. And I'm sure that you presented already a little bit on Costa Rica, and I'm sure that Eduard Müller will also will go more into depth in the case of Costa Rica, as he is the leader of the Regenerate Costa Rica initiative. And before I give the floor to him, I would like to ask everybody who has questions to write them in the chat, because we won't have the chance to let everybody speak. But if you write your questions in the chat, we will ask Kate and Eduard and Christine and Vice Minister Carlos Mora the questions that you write down there. So without further ado, Eduard, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you again for the opportunity of speaking to you all. And Don Carlos, thank you for being listening. And Mrs. Ambassador, thank you for the opportunity for organizing this opportunity to discuss the donut for Costa Rica. I'm going to make a short presentation. Actually, Kate already covered a lot. We usually are complementary, but Kate really went into some explanations, so it saves me a lot of time and I can land into the Regenerate Costa Rica action quicker. So we know our planet is in a dire condition. We know that we have to make changes quickly, and it's beyond making our impact smaller. We actually need to regenerate the world. And that's a little bit what I'm going to talk about, especially after COVID. COVID is giving us an opportunity to rethink. And what we're doing is actually a road mapping process on how to emerge post-COVID on a route to well-being of the planet and all life forms. We have to start considering ourselves as part of this evolving planet. So we know for many decades, at least people like me who have been working on biodiversity for decades, that we should have crossed the bridge from our economic system seeking a better harmonious relationship with nature. We're still stuck in the middle of that bridge. Now we can either run to the other side and actually start learning from nature how to live in balance with it, or then we can slowly come back and bounce back to our old economic system pre-COVID, which will inevitably lead us to a collapse in our civilization, probably quicker than later. Our development path has not been a positive one. Kate already mentioned this on the global donut. We have given importance to values which really don't represent a value. Consumption, money, our whole economic system is geared to a linear process, which at the end will not give opportunities. It's been 33 years since the Brundtland report came up with the definition of leaving future generations the possibility of living good lives. These future generations are really mad at us now because they know the planet is dying. They know they have no future the way we're going. They know we had to act a long time ago, but we really need to act now quickly. And you can't eat money. They don't really value a lot of the things that my generation was taught even at school on what to value and what is important. So I personally think we are in a historical moment for our civilization. Other civilizations have collapsed before us, but we have the advantage that we have enough science, enough knowledge, and enough communications around the planet to be able to actually reverse this. These impacts have also affected Costa Rica. Costa Rica is a country, or has become a country over the last few months, especially the last 2 months, that I don't like. I don't recognize it as my country. We see the manipulation of the right-wing parties together with religious groups and others really trying to polarize our society and break it apart. And if you can do that, you can govern very easily. So we really need to have a discussion on what is the well-being that all groups want. If we look at the future, and we all agree that we want happiness, we want well-being for our family, we want our kids to have a future and have education.
Sorry, Edward, are you sharing your screen?
Yes.
We don't see your screen, I'm sorry.
Oh, you should have told me before. I'm sorry, I forgot to share my screen. I've been zoomed out too much.
I didn't.
It's okay, you were sounding good.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Now you can see it, right?
You need some more detox of the Zoom.
Yeah, this is my detox week and I'm not detoxing completely, as you can see. So now you can see my screen?
Now we see it perfectly, thank you.
Okay,
continue.
Okay. So we actually need to think if it's really an economic issue or not. I don't think so. I think it's the economy is a symptom. It's the whole society falling apart. It's our value system falling apart. So we need to actually move to a different stage. And Kate already mentioned, the gross domestic problem, as Lorenzo Fioramonte states it. And you can see the inequality index with Gini growing in parallel with GDP. And actually there's the term in Spanish, which I love to use. And I know a lot of economists get mad at me for using this term, which is Producto Interno para Brutos, which means internal product for the dumb. It just matches. Take the S away and there you have it. So if we don't move away from the way we measure development, it's not going to happen. So going back to Kate mentioned already the planetary boundaries, which define actually a safe operating space for humanity, and which make us actually realize that we are already in the Anthropocenus. The main global changes are caused by humans right now. And as Kate mentioned, a lot of people don't actually realize that biodiversity loss is going to make humanity leave the planet before a lot of other changes, followed by fertilizer use, land use change, and climate change. And the most impressive thing for me is that agriculture has been proven to produce 80% of the global changes, only about 30% of climate change. But if we take all the planetary changes into account, the way we produce our food is actually killing the possibility of humanity and many other life forms to keep on being with us. So it's all over the media. There is no hidden secret here. We know that biodiversity is going to be the end of the planet if we don't really do something about it. The GBO5, this global report that came out a couple of weeks ago, show that all nations have not met the Aichi targets, which we established 10 years ago, promising we'd stop biodiversity loss. Actually, I grew up in a country, and some of the background noise, you might hear the monkeys that are howling just a few meters away from me. A tremendously biodiverse nation, and also a region with huge cultural diversity. Now, this cultural diversity has a huge amount of knowledge that is really required to learn how to live in harmony with our ecosystems. And we're losing that cultural background more quickly than we're losing biodiversity. The kid on the left, he's my oldest son. There he was 3.5 years old. He looks like this, and that's my granddaughter. The kid on the right is my youngest son. He's now 8, and there he was 3.5, already in a national park. The only difference is that he could see less than half the life that his older brother saw. So in Central America, we've lost over 50% of our biodiversity, and this is populations. At the global level, it goes from 60 to 90%. So we are in a very difficult situation in terms of biodiversity loss. Climate change, we already knew that by this year, we had to reverse the emission process. We know now that even in spite of COVID having produced an impact, it's still not enough for us to save the planet. We actually need to pull carbon from the sky and put it beneath our feet. Just reducing emissions will not allow us to keep on. With 38 degrees centigrade in the Arctic Circle and the huge methane release, you can see the crater at the right, and the forest fires that are releasing huge amounts of CO2. Australia almost doubled its emissions last year with the fires, which killed, by the way, over 1 billion animals. So we are moving into a stage that is going to be critical if we don't act. And it's not lack of information. Every year we produce so much information knowledge. What we've forgotten to do is transform that into wisdom. So we really need to sit down, be mindful, and use information for making decisions at political level, at academic level. And these decisions have to be holistic. One of the biggest problems we have is that we are working with a reductionist system in a reductionist academic model, where the disciplines are the strong points, the peer-reviewed journals, but our complex problems today require holistic solutions. So in terms of academia, it would require a big sledgehammer to throw the walls that separate the different faculties and get everybody to work together on solving our most important problems right now, the biggest challenges. So are we going to be just mere spectators of this new normal, or are we going to actually get active, roll up our sleeves, and become part of the solution? So we were told that we need to learn to adapt to planetary collapse. I'm not going to do it. I think we need to know that we can still build our future. So let's forget about adaptation. And I know a lot of friends are going to get mad at me for saying that, but actually let's start rebuilding the future, rethinking the future, bringing nature back. And nature has shown us in these months that we gave a vacation that it is resilient, it is bouncing back, and it's giving us an opportunity. But we need to realize that nature does not need us. We made a mistake with environmental education, telling people we had to take care of nature. So a lot of people think that by recycling a bottle or planting a tree, they're really doing good. We should have told people, and we should have learned that nature does really not need us. We just need it to function, to keep us alive. So an environmental impact assessment that allows you to do environmental damage, just making it a bit less, is legal today, but it's actually immoral in terms of the planetary stage we're in. So nature still is giving us another opportunity. It gave us this virus, which put all humanity on its knees. And I see it as an opportunity because we could have a potential vaccine or treatment for this virus, but there is no vaccine for planetary collapse. So this is giving us the time to think and rethink what we're doing. And actually, I see it as a huge opportunity. We see change happening very quickly all over the world. People don't want to bounce back. We need to bounce beyond to a different future. So we need to realize that we are nature. We're not separate from nature. And this is a key fundamental aspect that we have to change our mindset. So the Ministry of Environment shouldn't be the last ministry on the list of importance above, all the others. The Ministry of Economics, the Ministry of Finance are way above in the decision-making process at a country level. We need to reverse this, and we need to actually think the other way around. Nature should come first if we want to stay alive. We have lots of information. We have science, we have knowledge, we have nature-based solutions, we have the biomimicry initiatives that show us how to use nature as solutions. So it's not lack of information. We just need to reinvent ourselves. We need to rebirth our civilization. I used to think of a revolution, and I was for many years, an activist. Now I think more of it as an evolution, where we go from the ego society, the ego economy, where we have man on top, the woman underneath, and all life at our feet, to a transition stage of the eco economy, the eco society. But what we really need to do is move quickly to Seva, where humanity is in service of life on the planet. We have the conditions to make life possible, to enhance life. A good business today is the one that enhances life. So we need to give more than we take. So if we look at the Three Horizons model, I'm not sure how many are acquainted with this. We have the red line, which is a business as usual, where we're losing the fit for purpose of this economic model. There are a few things that are worth conserving, but the rest is going to collapse and is in the process of collapsing. And we have the transition to the regenerative world we need. Now, in order for this to happen, we need activists, we need actions, we need organizations that are on Horizon 2 that produce innovation and move us to that viable future. And that's where Doughnut Economics fits. That's where our University of International Cooperation fits. That's where a lot of our initiatives, the Regenerate Costa Rica initiative fit. We're actually that catalyzing agent to accelerate the transformation. And this gives me the background of Buckminster Fuller when he said, don't fight the existing system. Now, if you want to change the system, build a better model that will make the old one obsolete. So we actually have to transcend the thinking of superiority over nature and really think on the cycles of nature, on the relationships, on the care of life. This is the feminine principle, the principle of caring, of feeling, of belonging to a greater whole, of generating the vitality with a spiritual component to move forward. So Kate already mentioned this, and I can then skip over it very quickly. But coming from German descent, I used to think Germany was a model to follow. And I always grew up thinking that many of our Latin American countries had to look at Germany as an economic model to develop. And now I realize that Germany has been unsustainable ever before I was born. Its ecological footprint way surpasses its biocapacity. That means that going back to the German donut, it has achieved that social development using resources from the rest of the planet. So it actually has been sucking away the resources of other countries to be able to satisfy its social development. If I go to Latin America and choose two countries, Chile and Costa Rica, Chile is a country recognized by the World Bank, by IDB, by many of the international economic organizations as a model country of competitiveness. If you look at the social development, before COVID, Chile had twice the amount of inequality that we have in Costa Rica. And for me, I've been working for many years with Chile. That is the reason why society collapsed in October last year. People were left out of the system. And So Chile has gotten a lower social development with a large footprint compared to ours. And so this actually strengthened what Kate was saying about Costa Rica having an opportunity to show that we can do it differently. And if you look at social progress index in health and wellness, Costa Rica and Germany are at the same level. Chile is below. So actually, I can summarize and say Costa Rica is a model for development because we have the health and wellness we require at a way smaller impact. And this is what led us to establishing the Regenerate Costa Rica initiative back in 2018. We've been doing it slowly, but we're doing it surely, and now it's accelerating. And what we're doing is actually we're building the future we want. And that is the whole basis for this new approach. So Kate already mentioned the Dona Actions, the Doughnut Economy Actions Lab, which was just launched a few weeks ago. And this is opening a huge opportunity for collaboration, not only with DEAL, but also with all the other initiatives around the planet. We need to join forces and learn from others' experience, exchange experiences, co-create solutions. And this is what we're going to do. And what we're going to do is actually work on identifying our planetary boundaries, which are the most important ones. You can see land use change, ecological footprint, nitrogen, phosphorus, CO2 emissions, those are all exceeded, and inequality, which has actually grown significantly since COVID, and employment also. So how do we reverse these conditions and get to the ideal donut? And this is going to happen with a lot of different partners that have already engaged with us since already some 3 years ago on moving forward. And this is where Kate has actually been fundamental in allowing us to think things through on how we're going to do this road mapping process. So when we talk about this, what is regenerative development? It's not a trend. It's not a fashion word. It's the main difference is it's beyond sustainability. So actually the outcome of regeneration would be a sustainability. If we manage to bring conditions back for life, we can actually live in a sustainable planet. But this requires this holistic approach, a holistic vision, moving away from the reductionist disciplinary approach that our academic world has developed, that our institutions have developed. The Ministry of Environment should not be separate from the Ministry of Agriculture. It should be only one minister. So we need to really rethink even the institutions, and that will take time. So let's not fight the system. Let's just build a better one and make the old system obsolete. So if we think we need to benefit all life forms in every activity we do, we're on a good trend. And we need to measure development. Why not with happiness and hope? Our children need hope. Right now, they don't have hope. So if we can measure progress by hope, it will actually engage many, many people to join us in this process. So how do we integrate these 6 dimensions in a holistic approach? It sounds complicated. We have been learning how to do it, and the best way to do it is actually thinking of starting with territories. So we need functional landscapes. That means that any landscape, be it an urban landscape, a rural landscape, a productive landscape, a conservation landscape, protected area, whatever, a marine landscape, has to produce ecosystem services. So it has to have the biodiversity required for it to function and give us chances to enjoy life. And we need to measure it then with different indicators. So instead of working through the disciplines, we need to work across disciplines, solving problems. This is an initial map of one of our global, or actually national meetings. We're using the 7 vortex to actually be able to map the complexity and then be able to work on the interactions of some of the components. We're developing a set of actions. So functional landscapes will be vital for us to reduce our planetary limits that we've exceeded. We're working with Savory. We're actually establishing a Savory hub in Costa Rica at the end of this year to transform all our cattle into holistic cattle grazing. That means carbon negative cattle grazing. Regenerative agriculture, we need to move away from pesticides and fertilizers immediately. The sooner the better. And this does not mean reducing production. We already know that we can increase productivity by regenerative agriculture. And as a side product, we have health. We don't have anymore the high levels of cancer and all the other diseases that are related to the use of chemicals. We need to regenerate and increase our biological connectivity, and that includes the cities, and we do have initiatives for biodiversity in cities already. We need social regeneration. We need people to actually realize that they are forced, actually, we have to participate in defining our future. So we have to get involved in the decision-making process, and the governance in the future will be local. It won't be centralized. The centralized governments are not being effective. We obviously need regenerative economies, and that's where Kate comes in, and quite a few other initiatives. We need regenerative cultural design. So our culture is actually, in our case, we see it as the glue that holds society together and what makes us different than people in the Netherlands or people in Japan. It's not only arts and theater and music, it's beyond that. So it's actually that shared belonging that we need to get our people back together, to stop the polarization, to think in the future of what is actually needed and wanted by everyone, no matter what political party they belong to right now. So we can look at the future. We don't even have to deal with the current issues, which are not really important in terms of survival on the planet. We need regenerative politics. I would love to see a lot of young women taking the place of white-haired guys like me, men, or orange-haired men, and getting really these girls, these young women, to start making decisions, because the feminine principle is in them, in most of them. So we need that transition. And this cannot be done without spirituality. And when I speak with other academics and presidents of universities, and I say that spiritual component is the most important component, they actually look at me in a funny way and even ask me, how do you measure the effect of teaching spirituality? When I tell them you don't teach it, and you can't measure it, but it has to be part of the curriculum. We need to move to that deeper consciousness. So just one example of work we're doing right now, and we started already in different parts of the country, but we're very focused in Guanacaste right now. Since agriculture is 80% of the global changes at the planetary level, let's start with agriculture. So we need to realize that agriculture is biology, not chemistry. If chemical agriculture is so good, let's put a chemical stamp on chemical agriculture. Why do we force the people who are doing it well to pay lots of fees to get an organic certification? We already know that regenerative agriculture produces better, more quantity, and more sustainably and more resilient to changes at the planetary level. We need to bring in knowledge from other sources. So the academic Western knowledge is good, but here we have Don Manuel Castellanos, indigenous person from Lacandones in Chiapas. And this is an empty lot that was regenerated. On the left, it's a high tech from a Western university, a very well-known Western university. On the right-hand side, the same area, there's actually in the field a yellow string that divides the two. Manuel managed to bring ecosystems back. So we need to learn how to use all this indigenous knowledge, community knowledge, campesino knowledge. Everybody has to be part of the solutions. And Manuel has actually achieved 5% carbon for 50, 60 centimeters depth in his ground, in his soil. So how to regenerate soil? Let's look at how our ancestors have done it. We have also used other methods. This is Felix Cañet. He's one of the founders of the food security system that saved Cuba from starving when the Russians moved out and the blockade was there. And we've been using these highly productive, diversified agriculture regenerative processes to start feeding people that didn't have food and were starving, didn't have jobs during the COVID. So this has actually been very, very efficient. Production has now started, and people are actually recognizing that we can actually produce quicker and more abundance and better food with regenerative processes than with traditional agriculture. Now, in the case of Guanacaste, which is our pilot area, now most important, we started with other regions in the country, but due to the affected society there because of the closing of tourism, we're actually linking it to regenerative tourism. So developing a post-COVID type of tourism that will be regenerative. We're working with the local governments. We're getting an agreement with all the mayors of Guanacaste and manifestation of transforming Guanacaste into the first regenerative territory in Costa Rica. We're working, diversifying the economy and many other aspects, which I don't really have time to go into now, but I'm more than willing to talk with anybody afterwards. We have the science behind it. If we manage soils, we can actually reduce the CO2 excess we have right now in the atmosphere. This report came out just a few weeks ago. If we transformed all the cattle systems into regenerative grazing, we would capture more CO2 than what is released globally currently. And if we combine it with regenerative cropping systems, we have the most powerful tool, a lot more powerful than electric cars and alternative energy, to actually save the planet, because it will bring CO2 levels back to pre-industrial levels if we do it correctly and swiftly. So we need to focus a lot on the agricultural components. Now we're finally getting it out. Our friends from the Carbon Underground Kiss the Ground have brought out this documentary, which is actually getting regular people to understand the importance of soils. Our friend Alan Savory with the cow and the how, and being able to implement this holistic grazing systems that actually are the biggest carbon pump into the soil that we have. I won't go into details now, but cattle production can actually fix more carbon in the deep soil from 2 to 3 meters deep than actually a forest, which keeps its biomass, carbon in the biomass, which is now being more and more exposed to fires. We are using regenerative money, regenerative currency, the first regenerative currency in the world, which is seeds. And seeds is actually funding a lot of this, these components together with Wix.com. That's also being very generous in providing some initial funds for this initiative. The Wellbeing Economy Alliance, of which I'm proud to be a member of its global council, is also doing tremendous efforts at the global level. This is a new initiative. We just launched it last week, Bounce Beyond. We need to bounce beyond this economy and not bounce back into the old economy. And that is actually creating the infrastructure for all these initiatives: Doughnut Economics, Regenerative Economics with John Fullerton, Kristen Felber's Economy of the Common Good. All of these initiatives, they're complementary, they're not competing. Now, we need to get these into mainstream. So Bounce Beyond is actually generating the conditions to support the transition to these new economic models. For this, we need to re-educate. We need to change the way we're teaching our professionals. They're growing under uncertainty, permanent change, planetary collapse is exponential, technology development is exponential, 10 jobs that don't exist yet, 9 will be totally different. We don't even know in the next 10 years. So we really need to start moving our education to something different. So when do we start talking about critical skills and not soft skills? Those are the most important ones that a student has to learn. The technical stuff he can actually learn on YouTube. So how do we actually move, and how do we realize that it starts with me? It starts with ourselves. So we need to change. We need to develop the consciousness. We need to start changing our habits and do it then collectively and co-create the solutions. This puts our whole Ministry of Education upside down. Is a classroom a place to learn? I don't think so. Do we use the same ruler to measure all students, even so they're all so different? We cannot use the measuring stick that we used to have for the last century in this future education. So this is a complete redesign. Forget competition. We need to do collective learning, co-creating solutions where a farmer that never went to school, an indigenous person, and a Nobel Prize have a saying in this co-creation process. So I hope we will be remembered for awakening to this new reverence for life. I really hope that we can achieve that sustainability, and we have to do it through regeneration, and we need to celebrate this life. So biggest question is, will we act on time? And that is what we're trying to do by working with Kate in this process. So thank you, and sorry for not having shared my screen at the beginning.
Thank you, Edward. Also a very inspiring presentation. Really great to listen to you and Kate. The message is clear. We need to act. We need to act. We need to rethink the model of economic growth. Go from this degenerative to a regenerative development. Focus on well-being instead of welfare. Like buying a package of cigarettes contributes to GDP growth. But if you take care of your grandmother, and nobody is measuring that, a lot of the good things in life are not measurable. So it's really great to hear what you are working on, and not only you, but with a lot of stakeholders, as you also explained. And actually, there have been various questions in the chat, and we wanted to focus the webinar mostly on your presentations, but I do want to share some of the questions with you. And mostly they're about the political process, how to make it happen politically. And also, like the other questions, they relate a lot to who are the main stakeholders and what is the role of each of them. Maybe to retake one question, actually, both Pablo Zamora and Floribet Gonzalez, they asked what was the political process to make Amsterdam's leadership adopt this model? I think that one is basically for Kate.
Sure. So obviously I'm not on the inside of Amsterdam's leadership, but I can tell the story of what I understand happened. So the city of Amsterdam decided it wanted to embrace a circular economy strategy and has a goal of being 100% a circular economy by 2050, which is a crazy goal if you think about it, because nobody knows what 100% circular economy means. But it's the kind of goal that this era needs, the moonshot aspiration. They also had the commitment to say we will have no fossil fuel cars in the city by 2030. And they also had a commitment to say we want to increase equality and inclusiveness and democratization in our city. Now, no sensible government will have three strategies, one for circularity, one for energy, one for democracy. You're not going to do it. You need a framework that recognizes these are connected holistically. And when they came across the donut, I think they said, we see everything we're trying to do in this. And so embrace the donut as a tool drawing up their circular economy strategy, and realized that it helped enrich that strategy. And then said, we want to do a downscale donut for our city, and really wanted to pioneer that. Now, when we had created it, the interesting thing is that the city government came to us and said, now that we look at this portrait, we realize that the city institutions that we have are not set up to achieve it. As Eduard was saying, we need to knock down the walls between the university departments. And the city government was saying, we need to knock down the walls between our own departments, because we are so siloed in what we do. So we ran a workshop for them. Let me grab my favorite tool. Here we are. We ran a workshop for them last year where we said, let's look at the city governance as a design. How is it designed? And how can it be redesigned for this end? So we look always with any company or any city government, we invite them to look at the design of themselves. So one, what is your purpose? Why do you exist? What are you in service to? Now, Amsterdam has a really fantastic purpose. They've stated their purpose to be a thriving, regenerative, inclusive city for all residents while respecting planetary boundaries. If every city and nation began with that articulated purpose, we would be at least 50% of the way there. So Amsterdam has this very clear purpose to be regenerative. The second question is, what are your networks? So how do you relate to the suppliers who you're buying from? And how do you relate to your own citizens and your own voters? So how are you connected? How are you connected to other cities? How are you connected to other initiatives? How are you connected to change makers? So no government is going to ever be able to do this alone. as Eduard has shown, these wonderful networks of collaborators who say we're not competing, we're collaborating. How do we make a strong network and ecosystem of change makers? Thirdly, how are you governed? So who has voice in decision making? Which ministries have voice over each other at the moment? Who is at the table when a decision is made? And what are the principles and the rules and the culture of decision making? What are the metrics by which we're judging success? And what are the incentives given to individuals, to companies to achieve that? So purpose, networks, and governance. In a way, these are the easy ones. Then we need to go deeper into the design. How is your city or your nation owned? Who owns the land? Who owns the data? Who owns the decision-making structures? In a city, you know, who owns the spaces of the city? Who owns the power to generate finance? Who owns the industries that dominate this country? Because the ownership will profoundly determine the bottom one, which is, what is the finance in your city or your country? What is it in service to? Is finance here saying, I'm investing here because I want the highest, fastest return possible, and if you don't deliver me that, I'm gone? Or is the finance here saying, I'm investing in a commitment to the future that I know we can bring about together? I'm investing in social and ecological regeneration, and I know that the investment I'm making with you is going to bring that about. That is key, turning around finance, and it depends on how it's owned, how it's governed, how it's networked, and the purpose it's in service to. Sometimes we end up being driven by finance and everything else gets determined in service to finance itself. We need to start at the other end with a regenerative purpose and design our city institutions. So we ran a workshop with the city government of Amsterdam, had amazing discussions. And they said, we don't normally get to talk about these things. And we came out of our silos and we looked at the deep design of our city. And as I said, you need to do this with every company as well. Look at the deep design of your company, or look at the deep design of your university or of your public library. Whatever institution can look at itself. So that's where Amsterdam came from, and they've now embraced it. And I think they're getting energy from seeing that other cities are inspired by what they're doing. And let me say it again, it's not easy. It doesn't mean that Amsterdam is already doing everything perfectly. It's already a donut economy. They're not. But they are being honest enough to look in the mirror of the reflection that this brings and to say, let's restructure our statistics. Instead of creating an annual report of statistics of our city, we're going to structure them around the four lenses of the portrait so that we start to look at our city through new lenses.
That's great, Kate. Also the tools that you're using. I already looking at the chat, I see we need to do a follow-up event in which we maybe get hands-on workshop here and invite municipalities and also communities, so that communities also can define their own development, as Randall Saborio writes in the chat. Not sure if maybe the ambassador wants to add something to this. Also seeing that it's about a city in the Netherlands, how can we go about it so that both cities in the Netherlands and also in Costa Rica will implement this new economic model?
Thank you, Marije, and thank you both Vice Minister Eduard, Kate, for really inspiring presentations. And I'm sitting at the tip of my chair to see, you know, what we can do within the responsibilities also that we have as an embassy. And honestly, I must confess, I wasn't even aware yet that Amsterdam was already trying to translate this donut economics to their own municipality. So as I said in the beginning, I will surely try to get in touch and see if there is any link or liaison that we can bring about. But at the same time, I'm also very much intrigued by the politics, because in the end, we have an incredible, inspiring mission, but at the same time, there will be clashes of interests, obviously. And where are those interests being debated and being discussed? I don't have the answer to some of the questions in the chats that also indeed are about the politics and short-term visions of politicians, interests to be chosen again, the long-term vision, which is difficult to keep alive if you live on a day-to-day basis with daily consider. So I'm also still intrigued by many of those political clashes and where do you solve and where do you discuss at least those. Thank you very much, Marije. I'd like to leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I would also like to ask the Vice Minister to maybe share some thoughts about how we can disseminate this great model of well-being to cities in Costa Rica.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Certainly, the creation of public policy does not come from the desk of a public official from a ministry. Public policies should be created or co-created with communities, with people, and this is what we try to do. And I'm going to give you an example, because there are many initiatives, many private initiatives, just like it was highlighted by Mr. Eduard. The University for International Cooperation has a series of very important tools to help give solutions. But from the central government, we recently launched a national strategy of bioeconomics. And although bioeconomics can be just a portion within this entire strategy, we actually aspire to make this a tool with which we can make the economy more dynamic, this new economy and that new strategy for the 21st century that can allow us to take into consideration much of the issues and problems that were mentioned today, and to be able to build together along with everyone or stakeholders those tools or solutions. I would like to quickly comment that the 5 pillars of the national bioeconomics strategy has to do with rural development. It has to do with biodiversity, and precisely with how we use biotechnology and nanotechnologies in the development of new models of making business. Also, how do we use residual biomass as a way of having alternative energies? A 4th pillar talks about the advanced bioeconomics, which is basically to foster and encourage everything to do with entrepreneurships. And last but not least, how do we use the bioeconomics or urban bioeconomics theory and green cities, based on what Kate was mentioning and Eduard, to be able to tap into and make the most of these concepts in the development of sustainable, inclusive societies that can help us to break those paradigms that the model was showing us in all those gaps which we have not been able to cover as a society. Thank you very much. I think that with this, we have responded to several of the questions that we have in the chat, because they were very much focused.
Keep to the English. I'm sorry for the translator that I just automatically changed to Spanish. But thank you all for your great comments. With this, we touched upon the main issues that were asked in the chat, the political will, and also the stakeholders that should be involved. I thank you very much to all 4 panelists to be present today in this very inspiring webinar. I learned from Kate that already a lot of people are joining the community of the Doughnut Economics Action Lab as we speak. So it seems we are taking action already, although being part of the lab is of course not enough, but it is a start. And we will share this webinar in the Facebook page of the Embassy and also of Holland House. So if you want to look back at it, that's possible, and share it with everybody who could not join us today. And hopefully there will be a follow-up to this webinar on the Doughnut economic model. Thank you so much, and have a nice day or evening for those that are on the east of the globe.